Welcome back, everybody. It's Rodrigo Fondor with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News. Today, we're delving into a really cool story about buying, selling, and the fact or the role that real estate plays in different transitions, and how being intentional and being proactive in your transactions, even if it's a primary resident, can be a major part or a really key piece of the puzzle to set you up for, taking whatever that next step is in life that you want. So today I'm joined by Todd Speidell, who's here in Asheville, recently retired, or I guess last 5 years, as you said. And you have a really interesting story about how you got here and how your houses kind of helped you get to here.
Yes.
And really excited to hear a little bit about that story.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah.
So my story, in short, is going from conventional to contrarian wisdom. And each one worked in the right setting. In my 20s, I was a grad student working on a PhD in theology, not finance or anything like that.
Right.
And had $10,000 savings and bought a house. $118,000, 1986. Found the...
And where were you in that? Where
Pasadena,
in California.
California,
okay.
yeah. So conventional wisdom, I bought on the bottom end of the nicest neighborhood I could.
Was that intentional in that moment, or was it just kind of... Okay.
Yeah.
So you knew that at that moment, you're
Yeah.
like, that makes sense, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Southern California, really expensive. In my 20s, a grad student. Can I pull this off? And would it be a good investment? And I found a cute old fixer-upper, 1,000 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, for $118,000. And there was a line of buyers, and I was the first in line and paid full price, which I normally don't do.
Sometimes, though, the numbers work at full price.
Right. And 3 years later, decided to get out of Southern California, picked East Tennessee as a place to live, and sold that house for $220,000.
So that was an exciting day.
Yeah, $100,000. But pre-1997, you had to buy a house of equal or greater worth, or you got hit with capital gains taxes. So this was 1989.
Okay.
So I had $220,000 as a price I needed to spend or get close to it. And Knoxville houses are really cheap.
Right, okay.
So I kept telling my realtor, not nice enough. I need something nicer.
To avoid the capital gains, right? Yeah.
100,000, that's not going to cut it. These were houses way nicer than what I sold. Way bigger, way nicer. We're looking at 150,000. Don, not close enough. Get me something nicer. So we finally found this house, 4,300 square feet, 5 beds, 4 baths, study, bonus room, fully finished basement, built-in pool, et cetera, et cetera. It was only $175,000 though. But I liked the house a lot and thought I'd use the basement as rental space.
Okay.
So I bought that house, and I thought, sooner or later in Knoxville, things have to take off. These houses are just too nice and too cheap. And at the time, Knoxville, top 5 for cities people are moving into.
Oh, wow. So you got it kind of right on the upswing.
That's what I was hoping.
And
so I bought at the high end of a nice neighborhood. So
which is kind of the opposite of what you did in California, right?
It is the opposite.
And I know a lot of this is going to surround this house specifically, but so before we can kind of move on, it's how'd you end up finding your agent? If you remember that conversation, and how was that how did you direct the real estate agent you were working with to actually match you up well?
I was a professor at Knoxville College. He was the head of the department.
Oh.
He was also a musician, a licensed realtor. And
so it's kind of happenstance, if you will. It wasn't like you were out shopping and trying to find the best agent.
He asked me, would you let me be your agent?
And you're like, sure.
And he's a professor. He's not making a lot of money. So we did a lot of driving around and finally found that house.
And so that was what, late 80s, early 90s?
1989.
1989, okay.
Right.
Bought the house. Did you turn it into rental space?
Yeah, I did. So I bought the shortest, got the shortest mortgage I could, paid the house off in 11 years.
Was that a 15-year mortgage then?
Initially it was 30 because that's all I could afford. My fiance wasn't working. I was a college professor, but refinanced it within a few years for a 15 and then paid it off in 11. And rental income covered all the interest.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And then from Knoxville, you moved here, right? And
Yes.
so, I know when we first talked, and the reason I wanted to have this conversation on the podcast is how you were able to get your values worth on the house in Knoxville and how that kind of set you up for your move to Asheville.
Right. So 25 years later, living in that same house, I knew the Knoxville market was still dirt cheap. I thought, well, I hope I'm going to at least double my money. Almost did so in 3 years in Southern California.
Right.
25 years, I would hope.
Yeah.
So bought it for $175 and started talking to realtors, and they were saying 289, 279 to 289 range, and making about $100,000 over 25 years. I thought
You wanted more.
I wanted more. So I had a theory.
Okay.
I got my own comps. I drove around neighborhoods that were the next step up or two. Found my house is similar, and they were going for about $100,000 more than my house was.
So you, just to make sure I got this right, so you would go, say you're in ABC neighborhood, and then you'd go to XYZ neighborhood, and that neighborhood, for whatever reason, the houses were selling were nicer houses, better neighborhood or whatnot, and you went and say, hey, this house is very similar, it's 5 bedrooms, in-ground pool, basement,
Right.
etc.
Yeah.
That looks like my house, just on the wrong side of the street per se.
Right.
Okay.
And they were going for $100,000 more. And I said, there's someone out there who wants to split $100,000 with me. They're going to get the same house for $50,000 less, and I'm going to make $50,000 more than all the realtors said was possible.
And how did that process go? How did you find an agent willing to do that? Did you have to coach them, negotiate it with them, or?
I talked to about half a dozen agents or so. I'll only mention one of them who was the most annoying. She said that's a kooky idea, and there are things you have to do around the house. And I had some really high grade wood paneling. Not thin, cheap stuff.
Yeah.
She said, you have to paint that with white. No one's going to buy that if you don't paint it. I said, no one? I said, this is a rustic house, has lots of wood. It's in a rustic setting. I would think someone buying this house
It's going to appreciate
would
it.
like a high grade wood panel. She said, if you don't paint that, you are never going to sell. And she said, asking $350 when most likely you're going to be getting somewhere around $275 is also nutty.
Did you find a lot of resistance then as you were interviewing different agents to listing agents or whatnot overall?
Yeah, they said you've got the wrong comps. I said, I don't like yours. I went out and got my own, and I know there's someone out there who thinks the way I do. He's looking at price per square feet and
Is getting excited about seeing a lower price per square foot for.
And mine was an upper middle class neighborhood. His was just a little bit, the ones he was looking at, this hypothetical person, they're nicer. But he's going to see, hey, how come this same house is going for so much less per square foot?
So when you decided to list it, you listed it with an agent, or did you go for sale?
No, I did. I finally found a guy who said, that's 50 more than any house has ever sold for in this neighborhood. And 50 in a market like that is a significant
That's a big
number.
jump, right?
And he said, I said, well, we'll see what kind of activity we get, and if it's not enough, we'll lower the price. That triggers new activity.
So why did you decide to work with that agent versus all the other ones who came and talked to you?
He was willing to go with my theory. The others said, this is crazy, it's a waste of time. He said, but you have to do everything I say. I said, well, I'll listen to everything you say, and I'll take the recommendations that I think. He goes, if you really want that price, you have to do everything. It's like, let's not argue, just give me your advice, and I'll do what I think's best.
How much of his advice did you follow?
Probably the majority of it, but I didn't do a lot of the things that were expensive and speculative.
Could you give us an example, maybe one of the expensive speculative things you didn't do and maybe one of the things you did follow through on?
I remember the things that I did do.
Okay.
And this one was probably a borderline one, but I spent $1,000 to replace all the door hardware.
All the fixtures
on the whole house, yeah. That was the one I remember because it was...
Could go either way.
Some I thought that's might not be worth it. Others, that's just basic sound advice. But that one, $1,000 on this stuff, but I did do that.
Okay. So you listed it, let's just say June 1st. What was the activity over the first, 30 days or so of the house?
So there was a direct comp right across the street on the market for $289. Mine on the market for $349. That one had been for sale 6 or 9 months or something. Not a lot of activity. My house at $349 had 21 showings in the first month.
What do you attribute that to?
Smart people looking for a good value.
And was the house across the street not a good value then? Or what was the separating factor between your house and the house across the street?
Well,
you'd have to,
we both bought at the high end of a neighborhood. So I went for the middle end of a different neighborhood.
Right.
So he was suffering from, having done that. And I thought, I don't want to suffer from buying on the high end.
Right. So he was somebody who'd purchased it semi-recently, that house across the street?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got 21 showings in your first 30 days, and then from there, how long did it take you to, find your buyer?
So I had to vacate, so I'd sit in my car about a block away. I wanted to see who was looking at the house. And I knew my guy when he pulled up in an Elantra, which to me is a great value car. And it wasn't real new. So he bought a value car and was driving it around used. When he pulled up, I said, that's my man. And he had a wife and 3 kids. So a large house like that is what you'd want. He scrutinized it. He was there a while. It's like, this guy's smart. He's sizing things up. And he's wondering how a house this nice could be so much less. But it's in a different neighborhood. But it's still a really nice neighborhood.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad neighborhood, right? It was
it was upper middle class neighborhood.
Wasn't the high and high.
So I knew he was the one, and then he came back a second time to see it again.
That's when you're like, I got him now.
I was like, I knew it. And then he came back a third time. But at that point, we were beyond a month, and I did lower it to $339. And then he showed up the third time. I was like, he's ready.
So he made an offer then?
He made an offer that was $15,000 more than any house had ever sold for, but a lot less than what I was asking for. So my agent said, this is a lot more than I thought possible. I mean, it was about $40,000 more, his offer, than what my house would have sold for if I went with the other 6 agents.
So did you negotiate with him, or were you just like...
Hell yeah. Yeah.
So you pushed
that's
it.
The fun yeah, that's the fun of it. So I said, Noel, we're going to come back to him with a serious offer. Because he started with a serious offer. And it was a funky number, too. I ended up finding out he was a finance guy. So just...
crunching numbers and...
Yeah, or he likes numbers and was picking weird numbers or whatever.
So what was the offer? Not that you remember. It was like 289,333.
No, it was in the 3 teens.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was just like a random. It wasn't like 315. It was.
No, it was more like 314.1 or something weird like that. So I came back at him with like 330, I think.
Okay.
339 to 330. It's like, this guy's serious. I'm going to be serious. He came back at me a few thousand more. I went down 5,000. But I told Noel that when I get my house was paid off, I'm moving to Asheville, way more expensive. I said, I'm going to keep going with him until the check I walk away with, the first number is 3. And he said, well, you might not get that after closing costs. I said, well, then I'm not selling. So work with the agent and let the agent know.
That's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. And so he calculated that it needed to be around 320 or somewhere around there. So we're getting close.
Right.
320's right in the middle, but we're both starting to slow it down a bit, and Noel's starting to get nervous.
Like, I don't want to lose this great opportunity, right? Yeah.
Right. He said, you guys are really close, and I'm afraid this is going to fall apart. I said, if he wants to walk away, that's on him.
So
I had a renter at the time, $800 a month, and I was also running a school for a healthcare corporation, so I had a good job.
So you weren't in any needing to sell. Yeah, you were willing to play the long game. Do you think your agent did a really good job in like managing, like the other agent, the buyer, you, and just kind of pulling it together, or was that just kind of like happenstance? Because it can go either way.
He did a good job, but he was starting to panic when I went back like the 4th time or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he came up to me and said, we've got to settle this right now because they just had a miscarriage. Their 4th baby on the way. And he said, this is really fragile. You have to accept their last offer. I said, it's their miscarriage. It's my house. I'm going to continue the process. If it's too much for them, they can walk away.
So you kind of stuck to your guns.
I said, I don't think they will. But so he came back a little bit more. We're still apart. And Noel said, the other realtor and I are going to kick in, most of the difference, and you'll be right around 300 with your walkaway check.
So you got your number.
Yeah, I mean, the theory was we'll each save 50. He probably saved about 60, and I made about 40.
Which is a good deal, right? For everybody, yeah.
But it still wasn't over because the deck didn't pass inspection.
Oh no.
Used to be 4-inch was okay, now it's 6-inch. And so Noel said we have to hire an engineer, we have to rebuild this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I talked to the guy at Acadia Health Care Corporation who's responsible for grounds and buildings. Yeah. And he said, that's ridiculous. All you have to do is this, this, and that. Talked to my handyman. I had just bought a couple $1,000 grill from Sam's. It's a really big grill. He really liked it. I said, Freddie, you rebuild this deck for me, and this is yours. I'll pay for all parts. He said, this is simple. All you have to do is add some more beams and some diagonals, and
so they made it work.
Yes, but Noel panicked about that too. His plan would have cost about $5,000.
And this one costed you, I don't know, $1,000 on materials, give or take?
Probably a little bit more. $200. Yeah. I mean, we're just talking a few beams, a few crosses.
And that's it.
And that was it, so.
Were you out of the woods then at that point? Was that the last variable that you had to jump through?
There was one other thing that made him panic. After 25 years of living there, my house got broken into for the first time. Maybe because I had so many showings. I had a safe in my master bedroom closet, portable safe. I wasn't thinking they can just pick it up. So I had some cash and valuables in there.
Somebody came and picked it up.
And someone picked it up. That was all they stole, but it's a fair amount of stuff.
I mean, obviously you had it in a safe for a reason, so.
Yeah. So Noel said, I mean, he was just in a panic. There was just the miscarriage, the deck thing.
Yeah, now this.
It's sale pending. He said, you can't report it to the police. He said, if this becomes public record, that's going to be a problem.
So did you report it?
I did not. I mean, I didn't really see much point to it, and I had to go along with Noel once in a while.
Well, it's always the balance, right? Is how often do you listen to the agent you're working with versus how much do you kind of go off of your own intuition on things?
Right. So that's my contrarian story.
And then now you're in Asheville.
Now I'm in Asheville.
When did you move here? I'm guessing it was about 5 years ago.
I think 4.
4 years? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's see, that'd be 2014.
Yes.
So things weren't as crazy as they are now, but they were starting to heat up.
Yeah, so I bought an expensive fixer-upper in North Asheville and put a lot of money and time into it. I functioned as my own general contractor, and
How was that?
great. It was the most fun I've ever had.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And I was new in town, so I had to interview a lot of people. And sometimes I hired the first person, high quality work, lower price than I was expecting. Sometimes I had to talk to a number of people. I did get fined by the city of Asheville
Oh no.
for cutting down 6 pine trees in this huge hedgerow. I'm a few blocks off of Merriman. It's on a steep slope zone. So the city of Asheville, do you want to hear this story or not?
Yeah, no, let's hear it. I mean, this is all part of that home ownership.
It's online because the newspaper covered it. So the city showed up at my front door and said, "We know you already cut some trees down. We just want to know that you're not going to keep doing that." And he said, "You might get fined." So
If you ever hear that coming out, like as a heads up, it probably means that the fine's coming one way or the other, huh?
yeah, I'm trying to remember how many thousands. I think it was somewhere around like maybe $3,200 or something.
For the trees that you were fined.
Yes.
Okay.
So I went down, talked to the director of whatever,
Right.
and said, "I've got a problem with this fine. You know, first of all, don't you educate people like during closing or something?" And he said, "Well, it's your responsibility to know." He said, "You should have called me." I said, "What would have prompted me to call you while I'm cutting down diseased trees?" And he said, "Well, we're trying to do a better job of education." I said, "Well, I'm going to help you out. I already have the newspaper lined up to cover the story. They think it's an interesting story. New person in town gets fined a few $1,000s. And they were diseased trees. And documentation of that ended up rescinding the fine. But also, I said to the dude, "If I pay this fine, I'm giving you half the bill, because the city of Asheville cut down some of the trees on my property."
Oh, they did?
Yep.
Because they were diseased, or what was their reasoning?
Yeah, same thing.
Oh, okay.
Same rationale. And I called the head arborist who knew my property, had been out there, talked to him several times.
Directed the tree cutting, probably?
He did. And I said, "Did you know you cut down trees in a steep slope zone?" He said, "What? Merriman has, right?"
Yeah.
And so when I told his supervisor that
the city had already done it,
had done the same thing for the same reason, and the newspaper's going to be covering this. And he said, "Just get some documentation, would you?" I was like, "Okay."
Done.
Yeah. 1 week later, a sheriff shows up at my front door the following Friday with a delinquent tax property bill. So I called, this was the county, not the city.
Right.
So I called the county director and said,
"Excuse me?"
"I'm seeing a property tax bill for the first time handed to me by a sheriff. And I'm just trying to wonder how it got to that stage." I had bought in August. This was January or February. I think it was February. February, yeah. And a sheriff. And he said, "Well, we sent you the bill." And I said, "Who'd you send it to?" And he said, "Jerry and Linda Wilkerson." And I said, "But I just told you my name's Todd Speidell."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, we sent it to your address." I said, "What do people do when they move?" with their mail.
Yeah.
Forwarding mail. And he said, well, and I said, who do you consider the owner of a house? And he said, whoever owns it on January 5th. I said, what? For 360 days, almost a whole year of sales, you're sending the bill to the wrong people? Just based on address? And he said, well, we're trying to do a better job. And I said, well, newspaper's going to be covering this, but what else did you try to do? He said, we called you.
What number?
I said, what? What number? And it was a 10-year-old cell number. And I said, how'd you get that number? That's like 10 years ago. And you're calling 10-year-old cell numbers? I said, when you had the property reassessed, why didn't you just hand that dude the bill and hand it to him, hand it to the new owner? He said, well, that would have been inefficient. I said, oh, and your process is
was
efficient.
efficient, apparently, yeah.
He said, well, we didn't know you were there. I said, yes, you did. You sent an assessor within 3 weeks. So you did know that Jerry and Linda sold to Todd. You did know that. And
well,
so he rescinded the bill too.
It's always interesting, like that whole home ownership, and every time you buy and sell, there's just, you know, I mean, you did it at least 3 times now, right? So you have a little bit more experience, but sometimes if it's your first rodeo, like you just don't know all the different, you know, faults, like the tax thing or the trees, you know, you just kind of learn a little bit at each stop.
And Knox County, I lived in the county, not the city, unregulated. Asheville, highly regulated.
There's definitely a lot of hoops to jump through, pretty much whatever you want to do. That's
that
true.
Story is available online.
As well.
The tree and tax story.
So obviously you've had really good success as far as using your primary residence as a jumping point to the next stage in your life. Would you recommend that for everybody? Or do you think there's situations where maybe home ownership isn't the best way to you know, leverage a house?
You have to view a primary residence as that. If you can make money on it, that's great, but it's not the best way to make money on it. Real estate, variable, and you buy a house. If you're buying a house to live in it, you might not make money. So I try to make money.
I was going to ask you is, do you think that the fact that you've been able to, you know, make money on your last 2 and probably going to make money on the one you're in right now, you know, depending when you decide to sell, how much of it was luck versus, you know, intention and just like making the right decisions? I'm very intentional. I tend to make good decisions, but luck is involved too. Right now I'm renting out my primary residence. And planning on buying another house. So you're gonna do it one more time at least?
Yep.
Okay, so you will sell this one when you go to make
I'm
that
not sure. It
transition?
depends if I need to.
Okay.
If I don't need to. So the house I bought is it's a $500,000 house, but it's surrounded by $1 million houses. And the immediate neighbors did major remodels, and I didn't. Because to me, that's speculative, whether someone's going to like it or not. And I'm back to being
the worst house in a great neighborhood.
On the bottom end of houses that are $750,000 to $1.5 million. House 1 block up from me just sold for 1.5.
Wow.
I mean, much bigger house, much nicer.
But the number's still there.
So if I can collect rent for years and let that house appreciate, I think 5 to 10% a year, that'll be good for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Todd, thanks so much for hopping on here and having the conversation. Really good, unique perspective, and obviously the approach is key in that whole story, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Thanks for taking an interest in it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. This episode's coming out near the end of June, and we're hoping to see you July 2nd at our next meetup. So don't forget to join us then, and we'll hope to see you. Take care.